The wind carried the scent of dry sagebrush and dust across the empty station platform as the sun melted into the horizon, painting the western sky in strokes of crimson and gold. The old depot hadn't seen much traffic in years, and just the occasional freight train groaning its way through town, hauling someone else's fortune, far away from the people still trying to build their own here. Colt Harrison leaned against a weathered post, hat tilted low, watching the last light fade from the wooden sign that read, Ridgewater Station. He'd been riding since dawn, trail dust clinging to his jeans and the creases of his hands. Life as a cowboy was mostly quiet work, fence mending, cattle driving, and the kind of loneliness that comes from having too much sky and not enough conversation. He wasn't looking for anything that night. Not love, not redemption, just a moment to breathe. But fate doesn't ask permission before it sets a new course in motion. That's when he saw her. She was curled up on the depot bench, knees tucked under an old skirt, arms crossed tight against the evening chill. Her hair, dark and tangled like the edge of a storm, fell across her face, hiding the weariness that only comes from running, from something, or maybe someone. Colt frowned, his boots thudding softly on the planks as he stepped closer. He could see she wasn't some drifter used to the open road. Her clothes were worn, but not the kind of worn that came from a life out west. It was the city kind, too delicate for the dust, too thin for the cold. She stirred slightly as the wind caught her hair but didn't wake. Her shoulders trembled beneath the fading light, and Colt felt something tighten in his chest, that old pull of decency, the kind a man's raised with when he's taught to never leave someone in need. Without thinking, he slipped off his brown duster coat, heavy with the scent of leather and the trail, and draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it seemed to calm her trembling, and she settled again, the faintest sigh escaping her lips. For a long moment, Colt just stood there, watching her breathe, the quiet between them filled only by the creak of the wooden boards and the distant howl of a coyote. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but something about the way she sat, half in the light, half in shadow, made him feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff only she could see. He sat down on the bench across from her, resting his hat on his knee, and let his thoughts wander. Maybe she'd missed a train. Maybe she was waiting for someone who'd never come. Or maybe, just like him, she was lost in the wide, unforgiving middle of nowhere, hoping that somewhere out there, life still had something left to give. Time stretched on, the sky turning from gold to blue to the deep velvet of night. The depot lantern flickered weakly, throwing soft halos of light around her face. Colt could see now that she was young, maybe mid-20s, but her expression, even in sleep, carried a heaviness that made her seem older. He felt a pang of something strange, something he hadn't felt in years. Protectiveness. Not the kind you feel for someone helpless, but for someone who's been fighting too long alone. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a small thermos of coffee, and poured a bit into the cap, letting the steam curl into the cold air. The motion stirred her awake. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and uncertain, reflecting both fear and exhaustion. "You okay, miss?" Colt's voice was deep but gentle, the kind that could calm a spooked horse or a frightened heart. She blinked, confused, clutching the coat tighter around her shoulders. Where am I?" Her voice cracked, hoarse from disuse. "Ridgewater Station," Colt said, nodding toward the sign. "Ain't much of a place, but it's safe enough for the night." She looked down at the coat, then up at him, her brow furrowing. "This yours?" He smiled slightly. "Was. You looked colder than I did." For a moment she didn't respond. Then she whispered, "Thank you." Her voice carried a softness that made something inside him settle, like a storm easing off the horizon. "You been here long?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "Since yesterday, I think. Lost track of time." She tried to sound steady, but the tremble in her voice gave her away. "Waiting on someone?" Colt asked quietly. She shook her head, looking down at her hands. "Running from someone." That answer hung heavy in the cool night air. Colt didn't press. He knew better than to pry at someone's pain before they were ready to tell it. Instead, he offered her the coffee. "It ain't much, but it's warm." She took it hesitantly, their fingers brushing for just a moment, a spark of human warmth in the middle of the cold nowhere. As she sipped, her eyes closed, and for the first time, he saw something close to peace settle over her face. "You got a name, miss?" he asked after a while. Clara, she said softly. Clara Whitmore. He nodded. I'm Colt. He tipped his hat slightly, and for the first time, she smiled, faint but real. That's a cowboy name if I ever heard one, she said, and he chuckled. That it is. For a while they just sat there, listening to the night settle in. The world felt far away, the noise, the troubles, the heartbreak. Here, there was just the wind, the soft glow of the lantern, and two souls who hadn't expected to find each other. Colt finally spoke again, his tone cautious but sincere. Clara, I don't mean to meddle, but if you're in trouble I can help you find a place to stay. Ain't right for you to be sleeping out here in the cold. Her eyes glistened, with something that wasn't quite tears but close enough. You don't even know me, she whispered. Don't have to, Colt said. Sometimes that's when help means the most. She looked at him then, really looked at him, the rugged lines of his face, the sincerity in his eyes, the kind of strength that doesn't come from muscles, but from a good heart. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She nodded slowly. Maybe, just for tonight. Colt smiled, stood, and held out his hand. Come on then. There's a small inn down the road. Mrs. Greeley runs it. Kind woman. She'll set you up right. Clara hesitated before taking his hand, her fingers trembling slightly as he helped her up. His touch was steady, reassuring, like an anchor against the current of her fear. As they walked, she wrapped his coat tighter around herself, the faint scent of leather and cedar bringing her comfort she hadn't known, she'd needed. They reached the inn, a small wooden building glowing with lamplight and the faint sound of an old piano from inside. Mrs. Greeley, round and cheerful despite the late hour, didn't ask questions when Colt explained that the young woman needed a room. You always had a good heart. Colt Harrison, she said with a wink, handing Clara a key. Room 3's warm and clean. Clara turned to Colt, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. For everything. He tipped his hat again. You get some rest, miss. Tomorrow's a new day. As she disappeared into the warm light of the inn, Colt stepped back into the night. The stars had scattered like silver dust across the black sky, and he stood there a while, looking up, thinking how strange life could be. You spend years walking the same dusty trails, thinking nothing ever changes. And then one night at a forgotten depot, you find someone who makes the world tilt just a little. Back at his horse, he paused, glancing once more toward the inn. Maybe it was just kindness that had led him to her. Or maybe, just maybe, something bigger was at play. He didn't know yet, but he intended to find out. As the wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of the piano across the street, Colt smiled to himself and whispered, Sleep well, Clara Whitmore. You're safe now. The night closed around him, soft and sure, and for the first time in a long while, Colt felt like the road ahead might finally be leading somewhere worth going. And to everyone listening, remember this, sometimes life's miracles don't come with thunder or fire. They come quietly, like a cowboy laying his coat over a stranger's shoulders, like kindness that expects nothing in return. If you believe in stories like that, in the power of simple goodness and unexpected love, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because the next chapter, well, it's only just beginning. Morning broke soft and slow over Ridgewater, spilling gold through the lace curtains of Mrs. Greeley's inn. The world outside stirred to life. A rooster crowed in the distance. The faint clatter of wagon wheels echoed down Main Street, and the scent of brewed coffee mingled with the crisp air of a new day. Colt Harrison stood by the hitching post, brushing down his horse, his mind already tangled in thoughts of the woman he'd found sleeping on that depot bench. He hadn't slept much himself. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Clara, the way her voice trembled when she spoke her name, the fear buried deep in her eyes, and that fragile kind of strength that made him want to stand between her and the whole world. He'd told himself it was simple decency that had led him to help her. But deep down, he knew there was something more, something that stirred his heart in a way he hadn't felt since before the war, before the loss that had made him swear never to love again. He wasn't sure if it was fate or foolishness, but whatever it was, it had its hold on him now. Inside the inn, Clara sat at a small wooden table near the window, wrapped once again in his coat, her hands cupped around a mug of coffee. She looked better than she had the night before, a little color back in her cheeks, her hair brushed, though her eyes still carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. When Colt stepped inside, she glanced up quickly. A flicker of something. Relief, maybe, passing through her gaze. "Morning, Miss Whitmore," he said softly, tipping his hat. She smiled faintly. "Morning, Mr. Harrison." "Colt," he corrected with a grin. "Just Colt." She nodded, then hesitated before saying, I wanted to thank you. "For last night? For everything." "Ain't no need for thanks," he replied, pulling out a chair across from her. "Just glad you're safe." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken questions. Colt finally leaned forward. "You said you were running from someone. You still in danger?" Clara's fingers tightened around the mug. "I don't know," she whispered. "But if he finds me, I will be." The quiet tremor in her voice told Colt more than her words ever could. "Who's he?" he asked gently. Clara took a deep breath. "My husband." The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. Colt didn't speak at first, letting her continue at her own pace. "His name's Mason Whitmore, wealthy ranch owner from Silver Creek. Everyone in town thinks he's respectable, charming, generous. But behind closed doors," she paused, staring down at her trembling hands, "he's cruel, Colt, controlling, and when he drinks, worse. I stayed for years because I thought he'd change. Because I was scared. But a month ago, he hit me hard enough that I couldn't see straight for 2 days. That's when I knew I had to leave." Her voice cracked, tears glinting in the corner of her eyes. Colt's jaw tightened. He'd seen men like Mason before, men who thought money and power gave them the right to break whatever they owned, even a woman's spirit. "You did right leaving," he said firmly. "No one deserves to live in fear." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I took what little money I had and ran. Thought I could make it to the city, start over. But the train fare ran out here and then, well, you found me." She managed a small, sad smile. "Guess fate wasn't done with me yet." Colt reached across the table, his rough hand covering hers. "You're safe now, Clara. I'll make sure of it." But safety, as the West had taught him, was never guaranteed for long. By midday, word reached the town. A stranger had ridden in from Silver Creek, asking questions, showing a photograph. Mrs. Greeley mentioned it in passing, unaware of the danger it carried. Colt's gut twisted. He found Clara by the window, staring out toward the empty tracks, and when he told her, her face went pale as snow. "He's here," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Mason's here." Colt stood, his decision already made. "Pack what you've got. We're leaving. Where will we go?" she asked. "Away from here. Somewhere he won't think to look. I know the land better than any man alive." There was no time for argument. Within minutes, Colt had saddled, his horse and secured a small pack for Clara. They rode out through the back of town, following the river trail, the sound of distant thunder echoing across the plains. As they rode, the world opened wide around them, rolling hills of sage, the distant silhouette of the mountains, the vastness of freedom that somehow felt both terrifying and beautiful. Clara clung to him, her arms around his waist. And for the first time since she'd left Silver Creek, she allowed herself to believe she might really be free. They camped by the river that night, the stars burning bright above them. Colt built a small fire, and they sat together, silent except for the crackle of flames and the gentle rush of water. After a while, Clara spoke softly. "Do you ever wonder why some people are kind, when the world gives them every reason not to be?" Colt poked at the fire with a stick. "Reckon it's 'cause kindness ain't about what the world gives you. It's about what you give back anyway." She smiled faintly, her eyes glimmering in the firelight. "Then you've given me more than you know." The night grew colder, and Colt offered her his coat again. She hesitated, then whispered, "You'll freeze." "I've faced colder nights," he said with a small grin. "Besides, it suits you better." She laughed, a soft, uncertain sound that warmed the darkness more than the fire ever could. For a moment it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them, the quiet rhythm of their breathing, and the promise of something tender blooming in the ashes of what they'd both lost. But dawn brought reality back hard. Colt awoke to the sound of distant hoofbeats, too many for chance. He looked toward the ridge and saw dust rising. Mason Whitmore's men. He shook Clara awake. "They've found us," he said sharply. Fear flickered across her face, but she didn't cry. Instead, she stood tall, clutching his coat around her shoulders. "What do we do?" "We stand our ground," Colt said, his voice steady as steel. By the time Mason and his men reached the clearing, Colt was waiting, revolver holstered but hand resting near it. Mason was everything Clara had described. Tall, handsome, with the kind of arrogance that came from owning too much for too long. Well, well, he sneered, dismounting. Looks like my runaway wife found herself a new protector. She ain't yours to own, Colt said, his voice calm but deadly quiet. Mason's smirk faltered. You got no idea who you're dealing with, cowboy. Colt's eyes narrowed. I know exactly who you are, and I know a coward when I see one. Mason's hand twitched toward his gun, but Colt was faster. In one smooth motion, his revolver was out, cocked, and aimed squarely at Mason's chest. You take one more step toward her, Colt warned, and you'll be riding home in the back of your own wagon. The standoff stretched like a drawn bowstring. Finally, Mason's men shifted uneasily, muttering among themselves. Mason spat in the dirt, glaring. This ain't over. It is for you, Colt said coldly. Now ride. One by one, the men turned their horses. Mason last among them, hatred burning in his eyes. When they were gone, Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, and sank to her knees, trembling. Colt knelt beside her, gently taking her face in his hands. It's over now, he said softly. He won't touch you again. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, You risked everything for me. Why? Colt smiled faintly. Maybe because I saw something in you I thought I'd lost hope. She stared at him, the wind catching her hair, and in that moment, the world seemed to still. What happens now? She asked. Colt looked toward the horizon, where the morning sun was breaking through the clouds. Now, he said, we start again. Together, if you'll have me. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, her voice barely a whisper. You already gave me your coat, Colt Harrison. I reckon you've already given me your heart, too. And there, on that quiet stretch of land where fear had once ruled her life, Clara Whitmore chose love, not the kind bound by chains, but the kind born of kindness, courage, and freedom. Colt pulled her close, the warmth of the rising sun spilling over them both. And for the first time in years, he smiled without sorrow. They rode on together that day side by side, their shadows long and their hearts light. Somewhere behind them, the past faded like dust in the wind. Ahead, the road stretched wide and unbroken, a promise waiting to be lived. And as their figures disappeared into the glowing horizon, the narrator's voice would linger. Sometimes love don't come with grand gestures or fancy words. Sometimes it's as simple as a cowboy seeing someone lost on a depot bench, covering her with his coat and offering her his heart.